I want to introduce a topic here. It's kind of in line with what the series has been over the last few weeks. But I wanted to share something that happened recently. Diane began to talk to me about this book that she was reading on emotionally healthy spirituality. And I don't know what your world is. I know that my world's a little bit different, being in ministry and all that kind of thing. But whatever your world is, there's stress, right? There's difficulty, there's challenges, and sometimes sorry, we're trying to figure this thing out. Love technology. Love it. It's so helpful. But there's things that we have to get through, and some of the things that she was sharing, I'm not going to go into it, but she's going to. It brought life to me just listening to it. I hope it does for you too.
All right. Good morning. I'm Diane Hagnai, if I haven't introduced myself. And like Dave said, we're continuing the series on growth, about growing spiritually. And we found out that spiritual growth is described in the scriptures kind of like physical growth. It uses the same terminology that when you first come into Christ, you're like a newborn baby and you make a lot of messes. And that's okay. We have a lot of grace for that because that's what babies do. And then you become a child, and then you become a son and a daughter, metaphorically speaking. And then you maybe become a mother and a father, that you mature spiritually. By the way, there is a handout in your bulletin. There is an outline if you want to follow along with some of the things that I'm going to share. We know that spiritual maturity, though, is not automatic. If you feed a baby and the baby gets enough sunshine and, the things that it needs to thrive, it's going to grow, and it's going to grow into an adult. But that doesn't always happen spiritually. You can be a Christian for 30 or 40 years and still be spiritually a baby, still be in the nursery, spiritually speaking. And so that is not what we want to happen. So some things actually stunt our growth spiritually. And so that's what we're talking about today, how our emotional health affects our spiritual health. Is somebody going to turn this off for me? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you so much. All right, and here is really the bottom line, that it's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. It's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. And they're just so connected, and that's what we're going to talk about. What does it look like then to be emotionally mature? Well, about more than 20 years ago, there was this journalist named Daniel Goleman, and he had come across some research that had been done a few years earlier, and these researchers talked about this thing called emotional intelligence, and some people call it EQ or EI. And emotional intelligence is much more given to predicting your success in life than your IQ. So your EQ is really more important than your IQ, although our society puts a lot of emphasis on your intelligence quota. But EQ is far more predictive of how successful you're going to be. And so to make it really easy, I've broken it down into 3 things. What is emotional intelligence? It's about being self-aware. Are you aware of how you come across to other people? Are you aware of the effect that you have on other people? That's what emotional intelligence is about. Are you able to process negative emotions in a proper way, in a way that doesn't blow up a family or a workplace or a church? Do you know what triggers you? Okay? Are you aware of those emotions and know how to process them? And then thirdly, are you empathetic? Do you have empathy and care for other people? Do you genuinely care about them? Can you put yourself in their shoes and recognize how that they're feeling? So all those things are about emotional intelligence. And my husband is very high. He's always been that way as long as I've known him. Maybe he says he wasn't when he was a kid. He had to learn it. But he's always been really high in emotional intelligence. And then he married me, and I was like not even on the radar that I was so low. And I'm sure it was really a challenge for him, especially with us being in ministry, because this is something that you really need in ministry. So I went through some very, very painful experiences that I wish I would not have had to go through in my family and in church that helped me, because I did learn from them how to be more emotionally intelligent, and so that helped my spiritual growth. But that time when I was really, really low on the scale, I was doing all these spiritual things. And that's what's kind of scary. You can look like you're a very spiritual person on the outside. You can be reading your Bible, and you can be leading Bible studies, and you can be leading prayer groups and be a great prayer warrior, just you and God. You can be active in church, doing lots of stuff in church, and yet you can have a really low emotional intelligence, and it doesn't do the name of Christ very much good. Because people say, wow, I know atheists that are nicer than her. Or I know atheists that can hold their tongue better than she can, And it's really not a good witness to the world. And so that's the scary part. We can think that we're really spiritual because we're doing all this stuff, but emotionally we're stuck. And until we get unstuck, we really aren't growing spiritually like we should. And so that's why this is become a very important topic to me. And so it's been a journey for me. And some resources that I'm going to share with you today have been really helpful to me. So to simplify what emotional health and spiritual health is, I'm going to say it this way. Emotionally healthy people know how to love others and themselves well. They know how to love others and themselves well. Sometimes people are overboard and don't have any limits, and they just, aren't loving themselves well. But Jesus said we love others as we love ourselves, right? And then spiritually healthy people know how to slow down and love Jesus well. And we need both of those. We need to take time to allow God to heal us and to bring us what we need in our lives to be healthy. And our lives are so fast-paced, they're just crazy busy, and we've got to find a way that we slow down to have loving union with Jesus, and we do it consistently. All right. We're going to talk about some symptoms of being emotionally unhealthy in our spirituality, and I'm getting these from the book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzero, and I'm going to talk about him in a little bit. And he's got actually 10 things. We're only going to talk about 5 of them for the sake of time. And we're going to go through them pretty fast, but I want you guys to make a promise to me that you're not going to be doing any of this to the person next to you. It's all about what God's doing for us, right? It's for me, it's for you. And it's so much easier to see everybody else's flaws and blind spots than it is our own. But we're going to let God talk to us about where we need to grow, okay? All right. Number 1 is ignoring or stuffing negative emotions. Ignoring or stuffing negative emotions such as anger, sadness, grief, and fear. We almost have this belief in Christianity that those are bad emotions, and nobody talks about those because then you're a bad Christian. That you really you don't have it together, you don't have enough faith if you're experiencing these emotions. It's true that you should not be led by these emotions. You shouldn't make decisions based on these emotions, but to deny that you have them is to deny that you're a human being. Because all of us have these emotions, and we just have to learn, what are we going to do with these emotions? How are we going to handle them? But to stuff them or ignore them does not work, and I'm sure you found this out. It's going to come out somehow, some way. It's like trying to stuff down a volcano sometimes. It might come out in your physical health. You might be suffering some physical things, and it has to do with those emotions that have not been processed or dealt with. Or it might be that, you're at the store and the clerk tells you, no, you can't take that back, and you just blow a fuse because it's the straw that broke the camel's back, right? We have to not ignore them, but we have to learn how, like King David did. If you read the Psalms, he had every emotion imaginable, and he just processed those emotions with God. And then by the end of it, he was in a better place. And it's not like it happens overnight sometimes. Sometimes it's a process. Oftentimes it's a process, but we have to be willing to face those negative emotions, not ignore them, and then let God help us to work through them. Because God feels emotions. You know that? The Bible talks about all the emotions that God felt. He felt anger. He felt grief. He felt compassion. He felt joy. He felt sorrow. So when we deny that, it's denying that we're made in the image of God. Number 2, another symptom of being emotionally unhealthy is denying the past impact on the present. Denying the past impact on the present. It's true that when we come to Christ and we are newborn babies in Christ, a baby does not have a past per se. But a baby has an inheritance from their parents and from generations before them. And that's the same with us spiritually. Whether we like it or not, we have things passed down to us from our family of origin and further back than that. That affects us, and if we ignore that and we say, oh, that doesn't make any difference, I'm a new Christian, a new believer in Christ, it really doesn't have any effect on me, then we're fooling ourselves. Because it does have an effect, and we do have to learn how to deal with the baggage from the past to go forward. Number 3, and this is a really big one, especially for me, my personality, and that's doing for God rather than being with God. Doing for God rather than being with God. And it's almost easier to do stuff than to just be still. And our culture that we live in is all about results and accomplishments and what do you do? What do you do for a living? That's how we're paid. How much money do you make? I can tell by what car you drive or where you live or the clothes that you wear maybe. What was your education? How educated are you? What kind of degrees do you have? All those kinds of things are the wrong barometer of our worth and value. And we have to fight actively against that in our culture. Spiritually and emotionally healthy people realize that they have worth and value apart from what they do. So I want you to just think for a second, what if right now I lost my job, or my career, or my schooling, or whatever it is that you're doing right now, or my ministry? What if I did not have that anymore? How would I feel about myself? Would I still feel like I have worth and value just because God loves me? That's a really sobering question to ask ourselves sometimes. Because it's really, really easy to get our worth and value on what we do. And then when our doing for God outstrips our being with God, that's when we get in big trouble. And that explains to me a lot of what happens with spiritual leaders. Because they were so busy doing for God, and they're not being with God, and they're not receiving what they need to sustain what they're doing. So we have to keep those things balanced. Number 4 is living without limits. And it kind of goes along with the one before it, because if your value is in doing stuff, then you're just going to say yes to everything, and you're not going to be able to tell anybody no, and you're not going to have any limits. But we're not God, we are human beings, and if we don't have limits, we will burn out, have some sort of really bad physical problems, or our relationships will suffer in some way, but we won't be whole people. Even Jesus, when he was on the earth, had limits. So that should tell us something. And number 5 is covering over our weaknesses, our brokenness, and our failure. I don't know how much time that you spend managing your reputation, but way too much for me. I want people to think well of me. I want you to, think I'm a good person. a smart person or whatever, we just spend a lot of time managing our reputation, and it causes us to have a false self. And some people live their whole lives and go to their graves and never really find out what their true self is because they've been so busy trying to be somebody else or put on an image that everybody will like. And we do that because we don't want to be rejected, and so we cover over the things that are wrong with us because we don't want people to see it. And that's why we put a big emphasis on these groups, because it's not like you go the first week and you tell everybody your sob story, but over time you develop friendships and you're able to take off the mask and you're able to share, because the Bible says that when we share our sins with one another and our brokenness with one another, that's how we get healed many times. That's what God uses to heal us. And so emotional health is really tied up with all of these types of things that we need to take the mask off. We can't know God if we don't know ourselves. This is kind of an interesting thought, but back in 500 AD, St. Augustine said, "How can you draw close to God when you are far from your own self?" Isn't that interesting? So if you don't really know who you are because you're trying to please everybody else, then how can you know God? How can you allow him to know you? So how are we going to get past? And like I said, if you don't recognize yourself in any of those five, there's five more in the other book, so the book I mentioned. So you're probably in one of those. But I recognize myself too much in these. But I want to get emotionally healthy in my spirituality. And so I'm going to talk to you about a tool that's almost forgotten in our culture. But first I'm going to share about Pete Scazzero, who is the author of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, which is a course and a book and devotional. There's lots and lots of materials. So about 20 years ago, he began on a journey. And I really identify a lot with him. He's Italian-American. I'm half Italian-American. And he just really speaks to my heart when I listen to him. But he came to Christ as a young man in college, was deeply transformed, went to Latin America, worked with the poor there, then he went to seminary, and then he started a church in Queens, New York. And the church just took off, and he and his wife were busy, then they had 1, 2, 3, 4 kids, and then they're busier, and his life just, he felt like, almost like Jesus had lied to him when it said that your burden will be light and your yoke will be easy, because I don't know if you ever saw the Greek mythical figure of Sisyphus. I think I'm saying that right. The guy that he was destined to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity, and then when he would get to the top of the mountain, this was his punishment, the boulder would just roll back down the other side, and so he would just have to do that his whole life. And that's what he felt like in ministry, like I can never get on top of all this work and these problems, and a lot of service occupations are that way. And so he didn't know what he was going to do, and his wife was starting to complain that she felt like a single mom. But he just kept on going and going and going. And then one day he had started a Spanish-speaking congregation, and there was 250 people, and it was going great. And one day he went, and there was only 50 people there in the service. And he said, "What happened?" And unbeknownst to him, an associate had taken 200 people and started a church down the road. And he was livid. And the way that he dealt with hurt was just to get angry. And he was so angry, and he could not believe this had happened. And he tried and tried to forgive this associate, and he just wasn't getting anywhere in it. And he said one time he sat in his car and just swore like a truck driver. Cursed, every curse word he could think of, and made some up, I guess. Sorry if you're a truck driver. But anyway, didn't mean to offend anybody, but that's what he said. So anyway, he just didn't know how to deal with it, so he just kept stuffing these emotions, because he felt like, he's the pastor. He can't be having these emotions, but he was. Well, he thought he was at the bottom of the barrel, and then a few months later, his wife comes to him, and she said, "You know what? I quit." She said, "Your leadership stinks. You're afraid to confront anybody in the church because they're going to leave. I can't do this anymore. So I'm not quitting marriage, but I'm going to a different church." And she was serious. She said, I'm taking the girls and we're going to a different church. So she had been trying to talk to him for a long time, but that got his attention. That really got his attention. So he called up a mentor of his, and they both went away for a while to get some counseling and to get some help. And where they had to start was some of those things we talked about, the emotional problems, the baggage from the past of how you deal with things, the living without limits, all those things they had to start working on. And they did start working on it. And they started bringing some of these things back to their church in Queens, New York. Now, their church there, it has more than 70 nations represented. It's really a melting pot. And you know, New York is busy, 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 busy. So if this stuff can work there, I would say it can work anywhere. And really what they did is they ended up, God led them this way, and it's pretty amazing to me, but he led them kind of out of their own evangelical tradition, which is what we are, and he led them to some of the older Christian traditions in Catholic and Orthodox traditions of silence, solitude, Sabbath, and things like that. And they visited monasteries all over the world, and they lived there. You know, they were gone for like 4 months, and they lived there and just learned the rhythms of people who are just spending time solely with God. And they knew they couldn't do that when they got back to their home, but they could take bits and pieces of that, and they could see if it would work in their context, in their busy lives, and then they could bring it to their church and see if it would help bring transformation. And you know what? That was almost 20 years ago, and they found out it did. It really did. And so that's where all these resources came from that I happened upon maybe 6 or 8 months ago. I can't remember. So one of the biggest things that they found out was that they couldn't fix themselves. They couldn't fix one another, and that was a bad idea. That only God could heal them. But their job was to make a space for God to do that. It's not like, okay, God, heal me while I'm rushing on my way and I'm always doing things. But they had to find a way to make it work in their context as parents and pastors. And so that's what I want to share with you, just one of the tools that they talk about. And we're going to practice it, and then we'll be finished. So we're going to talk about silence. And silence is something that the scriptures talk about fairly often, especially in the Old Testament. And it's almost unknown in our culture, especially in the church culture. It's almost unknown. And for some reason, we're almost afraid of it. I mean, I'm not sure why, but we have elevator music, we have office music, we have our radios on in the car, or the TV going when we get home. Some people sleep with the TV on, and we just don't like silence. And that's a good question to ask yourself sometime, or ask God, if that's you, why don't I feel comfortable with silence? Because I think most people are really uncomfortable. But that would be the exterior silence. But then there's the interior silence of quieting our minds and our thoughts just to focus on God. And if you've ever tried it, you know what happens. It's like, oh, there goes that thought. Oh, I'm thinking about something else. And it's just really hard to rein it in and to tame it. But the good news is it's like a muscle that you can develop, and through practice you can get better at it. So Psalm 46:10. Be still. This is God speaking to us. Know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. A priest named Henri Nouwen said, without silence, it is virtually impossible to grow spiritually. Without silence, it is virtually impossible to grow spiritually. I don't think I would have believed that even 5 years ago. But I have found in my own life that that is true. Silence is so important. So what happens in the silence? We are surrendering to God. We are surrendering our wills to God, our bodies to God, our thoughts to God. We are saying, I'm not God, you are. That's what he says. Be aware. Be aware that there's a God and you're not him. Right? it's to recognize that we don't have all the answers, that we need to just be before God. We don't need to say anything. You know, children talk a lot, right? They always, my little 3-year-old grandson talks incessantly. He never shuts up. He just talks and talks and talks until he goes to sleep. And we need to be able to be before God and not have to say anything and not have to get anything from him. Not even expect him to speak back to us. That we're just there together. We're just sharing this moment together. And we don't have to do anything. There's no pressure to do anything. There's no pressure for anything to happen. That we're just there with God. And I'll tell you some things that I've experienced in doing this. By the way, they found out, just medically speaking, that only 5 minutes a day of silence, and they're not even talking about Christian meditation or anything, they're just talking about silence. 5 minutes a day rewires your brain. Your brain chemistry changes. You're less stressed, you're less triggered, you have less anxiety. It just changes you. So just for that reason, it's worth doing it. And I've noticed that in my life. But one of the things that I've noticed is that, and this is going back to grandchildren or children, those of you who have been around children, you know that they're going from the time they get up in the morning till the time they go to sleep. And then they finally go to sleep, and you go in and look at them. And they're so peaceful, and you just love them. They're so sweet. And you just look at them. You know, they don't have to do anything, right? They don't have to perform. They don't have to achieve anything. They're just sleeping, and you just look and you just love them, right? They're just so wonderful and beautiful, and you don't love them for what they do. You just love them because they're your kids. And that's almost the sense that I've gotten, that when I'm silent, that God's just looking at me that way. And I think he's looking at us all the time that way, but we don't take time to slow down and find out. And then when we become aware that he's looking at us that way, it heals us. It does something inside of us that is really, really amazing. So we're going to practice this. I'm going to give you a few tips. I'm still a baby at it. I'm not very good at it, but I have been trying to do it every day. And I want to talk to moms that have kids at home, and you stay at home with your kids, because I don't want to give any more guilt to parenting, because there's so much stuff that parents feel, you know, that they're not measuring up or whatever. And I'm not trying to give anybody anything else more to do that they can't do. But the really great thing about this practice that I'm going to tell you is going to take you like 5 to 7 minutes, and you just want to do it more than once a day. 2 or 3 times a day is good. But it doesn't take a long segment of time. Now, trying to get the exterior silence going at your house might be the challenge, so that's what you need to pray. God, how can that happen? But I've been there, and I know what that's like. So there's no guilt or condemnation about this. So I have this book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality Day by Day Devotional by Pete Scazzaro. And the way it works, there's 3 per day that you can read, and it starts with 2 minutes of silence. So during that 2 minutes of silence, it's good to just kind of put yourself in a posture that's comfortable and to open up your hands, and it's kind of a surrender. So I'm, with my physical body, I'm surrendering to God, and I'm just thinking about God. And when my thoughts start to wander away, right away they'll start to wander away. You just bring them back by, it's helpful for me just to think of the name of Jesus, or Abba, Father, or Holy Spirit on the inside. Just think those thoughts. One monk put it this way. He said, if your thoughts stray from God 10,000 times, that's 10,000 opportunities to come back to God. So it's so cool. It's just so full of grace. I love that. You know, so this is not pressure. This is something that we're getting to do, that God wants us to help us through, right? So there's 2 minutes of silence, and there's a scripture and a devotional and a little prayer, and then you end with 2 minutes of silence. I take it to work, or up here at church, and at lunch. I try and do this. You know, I have my regular time with God in the morning, but then I do this. And then when I get home at night, I might do it, or before I go to bed. And it just helps me connect with the Father and just remember what's important and let go of things, let go of anxieties, and finding out what's really a priority in my life, you know. So if you're willing to, I would like to share one of these with you. We'll just do the 2 minutes of silence at the end, since just for the sake of time, okay? So I'm going to read, and I know that you guys don't want me to talk about Martha and Mary, but I'm going to read about Martha and Mary. Poor Martha. She gets her whole life, all of eternity, she'll be thought of the lady that was doing instead of being with God. All right, so this is the scripture reading. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what's better. It will not be taken away from her." And then here's the devotional. Martha and Mary represent two approaches to the Christian life. Martha is actively serving Jesus, but she's also missing Jesus. She's busy in the doing of life. Her life is pressured and filled with distractions. Her duties have become disconnected from her love for Jesus, because she did love Jesus. Martha's problems, however, go beyond her busyness. I suspect that if she were to sit at the feet of Jesus, she would still be distracted by everything on her mind. Her inner person is touchy, irritable, and anxious. Mary, on the other hand, is sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to him. She is being with Jesus, enjoying intimacy with him, loving him, and taking pleasure in his presence. And that's what silence is about, that we just are in the presence, enjoying him. Her life has one center of gravity. I suspect that if Mary were to help with those many household chores, she would not be worried or upset. Why? Because her inner person has slowed down enough to focus on Jesus and to center her life on him. So we're going to skip the prayer, but we'll just go right. If you don't mind, just close your eyes and have a thought in your mind of, a name for God, or a small prayer that you would use if your mind wanders. And we're just going to take 2 minutes and surrender and just come before him in silence.